Heidi, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness.
Thank you. So good to be here.
This book, The Secret Keepers, has been really like, after I finished reading it, which was last week, for probably about 3 days, I was just kind of like feeling into just the power of a human soul to overcome or subsist with pain, darkness, and trauma. It was so inspiring that when I would have a little trigger come up for me personally, like an old pattern and I was feeling sorry for myself about, I thought about Margie, right?
Margie.
Margie.
Uh-huh.
I thought about Margie, who you wrote about. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, it's called The Secret Keepers. And the subtitle is An Inspiring Story of Betrayal, Survival, and Hope. And Heidi, for our listeners, just give us a little background on what brought you into the space of trying to gift people hope. What was it in your life where you were like, I'm going to write about this. I'm going to find a way to communicate to people that there's always hope. What happened in your life to bring you to that point?
I've had, I've got 4 kids. They're all grown and married now. But after my first child was born, I went into a pretty deep depression, and it just knocked me over. Like fetal position under her crib depression. Pretty bad. And I was the sole breadwinner at that time. My husband was in graduate school, and so I was the only one earning money. And I was able to somehow get myself, on the city bus and into downtown Phoenix to work full time for that paycheck, dropping my daughter off at a daycare situation. And that was a really dark, hard time. And I just had to grovel through it. It was back in 1985, and depression wasn't talked about back then.
No.
And I didn't know that my grandfather had had it over and over and over again, multiple really bad episodes throughout his life. It just wasn't talked about. And so I kind of went through it alone. And I kind of battled through that and found some survival mechanisms, agreed to do a little bit of counseling. I was terrified of that because I thought as soon as I am honest, they'll lock me up. I had those thoughts. But she was wonderful. The counselor that I went to was wonderful. And she taught me some really good imagery to do and some things that I could do with those negative thoughts that come in and how you can turn those around and recognize them when they come in, that they are not valid and they are not truthful, and to spin them and then write them down in a positive manner. So there were some exercises that slowly pulled me out of that. But I'd been through some hard times like that. Your normal stresses in work and careers, family issues, all of those things that had happened. And so I was actually at a pretty tough time in my life. I wasn't clinically depressed, but I was at a really hard time trying to figure out, my last child had just left the nest. This is like 10 years ago. She had left the nest for college. So I know I'm going to be an empty nester. And I'm saying to myself, where's my purpose now? Right. I felt like I needed to redefine myself. And I was nervous about anxiety and depression taking a hold, because I saw this as a big change. And so I'm out walking and I'm out hiking, right? And I'm praying and I'm saying, how can I make a difference in this world? What can I do? And I got on an airplane to fly up to see relatives for Thanksgiving. And in between airports in the sky, I was sound asleep and I had a dream. And in that dream, I saw my hands holding a book, and I knew it was my book. And it was about hope, and it was about enduring through the struggles of life and coming out on top and having a perspective that was different than what the world tells you. And when the plane hit the runway, I woke up from that dream and I had two immediate thoughts. And the first one was, that was so real. It felt different than.
So more like a vision than a dream,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just felt it throughout my body. It wasn't just, oh, that was weird,
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thought that quickly followed that was, there's no way, right? There's no way I would ever write a book. That is not on any list of mine. I'm a business major from Arizona State University, right? I'm not a lit major. Why would I ever do that? And then, of course, all the negativity, right? The gremlins come forward and they whisper in your ears and say, you're not smart enough. You didn't study this. Nobody cares about what you have to say. All of those negative things. So I didn't tell anybody about that dream. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't tell my kids because I didn't want it to be real. But eventually, over time, there were so many, in the next several months, there were so many moments that it didn't matter if it was the cashier at the grocery store or the bank teller or a song on the radio or a hymn at church or something I would read in a magazine. They all said, Heidi, you need to write that book. And I couldn't sort of run from it. And so
I have to tell you, that's a very, I've interviewed well over 100 people on this podcast who talk about kind of that transition or bridge, or I could even call it a rite of passage into their soul purpose.
Yeah.
Was they just passed through something and all of a sudden they could have had a corporate job, or they could have been doing this or that or the other. They could have been a stay-at-home mom, whatever.
Right.
And it's like all of a sudden their soul voice, the voice of the divine, whatever, literally intervenes.
Yes.
And takes them on a completely different track. And the first thought they have is, I can't do that.
It's too
hard.
I
didn't study that. I'm not a writer. I'm not this. I'm not a healer. I'm not. And it's like, well, no, everything in your life has prepared you. So you're actually the expert. And that's where you have to get out of your own way. So.
Right. Exactly. So now, I look back at that and it took me on an entirely different path that I didn't even see coming. I wrote the first book, which called Finding Hope in the Journey, which is sort of my perspective on recognizing hope in all of its forms, because it's so varied and it can be something that we see or feel or hear. And we have to take the blinders off, because when we get in those really dark circumstances or struggles, where we're hiking up the tough hill of life, we want to put the blinders on. Maybe I'm speaking for right. And we want to just put our heads down and grit through it.
Yeah. And when you were talking about how depression was like this looming thing that you were afraid, when you became an empty nester, it would just rush right in. I've had that same, so you just work harder, you just do more, you exercise more, you pray, you do the things more to circumvent that.
No.
And it's like, it only works for a little bit. It only props you up for so long. So what's cool about your story is that you've won awards. Like you won the 2021, what was it? The Best Inspirational Award for this book, The Secret Keepers.
Right.
I started reading on the beach with my husband. We were away in Florida for a weekend a few weeks ago. And I was just like, oh my gosh. She's like, we need to go in. I'm like, wait, just a second. I'm reading this.
Right. Just 1 minute. Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about how, unless there's more to add about your story, because you just did it, right? You just sat down and did it.
I just did it. Yeah. And book 1 led into book 2, which prepared me to write book 3. I'm now writing book 4, but each one had a purpose, right?
It's themed around your life. Like it's themed around hope.
Yeah.
And like you said, you explored the forms of hope, which I'm really fascinated by, but I want to get into Margie's story. Let's bookmark hope and come back to, how do you know if you do or do not have it? How do you know how to foster it? All those things, or how do you know what to do to foster it more?
Yeah.
Because sometimes that's all you have. You have no evidence out here of anything.
No evidence.
And it's like, you've got to find that reserve inside of you, that little glimmer. So I want
Right.
to talk about that, but let's talk about Margie and how you found this woman and what happened to bring this beautiful book forward, her story,
Yeah.
which was begging to be shared, right?
Yeah. She found me because she had read the first and second book of mine. And so she reached out to me. We have a common friend, and that friend said, you know, if you ever had a minute to call Margie, she just loves your books and she's had a hard life. And I love doing that. I love making a difference one human being at a time. And so I was happy to reach out to her. I called her and thanked her for loving my books. And she said, you know, we talked a little bit about them. And then she said, you know, I have a story too. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah. You know, so many people say
Everyone's
that to
got a
me,
story.
right? Because that's what I do. I write people's really hard stories that are so inspirational that help all of us. And so she started, I said, tell me about yourself. And she started in 2 minutes, I was up scrambling for a piece of paper and a pen because I had never heard anything like this before in my life. And as tragic as it was, I knew in the first few minutes that she was, I learned from her about DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, used to be called multiple personality disorder. So I understood very quickly that she has parts. And I had never talked to anybody that I was aware that anybody would had parts. And so I'm thinking, oh, you know, and she's telling me a little bit about why that has happened, which is abuse in the past. She was what is the word I want to use? I want to keep it fairly, PG, but essentially her father took advantage of her every single night throughout her entire childhood. And she was also subjected to a lot of ritual abuse and drugging and all kinds of things from people outside of her parents. So it was just this horrific. And I think I say it in the book, you would know, Cherie, but I think I can say it in the book, not graphically and not triggering, but to say it in a way that you know what I'm saying without me saying it.
Sure.
That's the way that we wanted the book written. And so she's got this amazing ability to dissociate herself. And it's this beautiful
Which is a
protection.
gift.
Oh, it's a gift.
That people understand, like, and we all do it to some degree, but
Right.
some people, and I learned this from your book, because I do have a psych degree and I knew it was called multiple personality disorder when I was studying.
Yeah, sure.
But what I learned from your work is that, there's a lot of different ways that people react to severe trauma, but it's actually almost like this genius point to be able to integrate trauma and store it to a degree and create different parts, as you say, or
right.
It's not really personalities per se, right? It's more
right.
Like, I don't want to even say it's a separate being. It's almost like a creation.
A creation.
A new creation. And that's the positive way to spin it, but not all of those creations hold truth. Even though they've created them, that's all that she knew to do with that. When did the abuse start? When isn't she like
4 or 5?
Okay.
Yes.
And it went all the way up until
high school.
Okay. Yeah. And then she met her husband in high school, which was a huge blessing because he has stuck with her through all of this. And how old is she now?
She's in her 60s.
Okay.
Yeah. So
she created these parts.
She creates these parts. And, she has a beautiful, healthy 5-year-old mind at this time, right? She is not mentally ill. So it's a different way to look at it. I mean, when DID is this beautiful protection that we have, our mind has this ability to separate off parts. If the abuse is prolonged, if it's consistent, and if there's no escape to children under the age of 8, that's when we frequently see DID.
So if it would have happened when she was maybe like 12, what would she wouldn't have had the same ability to create.
Maybe not this the same degree of the number of parts and the
Okay.
some of those parts, because it happened so often to her, some of those parts have different jobs. One part can't even handle all of the abuse. So there are different parts that hold different portions of the abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just this realization that for her, in finally understanding what's happening to her mind and why the problem with it, with the parts and with the DID, is that it comes forward later in life, most often to women in their 30s, and they begin to get seeping memories, right? Whether it's in dreams or whether it's moments of consciousness that are gone, and confusing signals, and they start to hear little voices and things. It's not schizophrenia. It's very different. It's not outside sources. It's parts of their own mind. And so the confusion for these adults is what is happening? Am I going crazy? You know, why am I having all of these thoughts, and what is happening here? So once she gets the confirmed diagnosis, which takes a lot of time for these people with DID, it's quite a process to get there and to see a therapist who's trained enough to recognize it.
I would assume that some people have that and it just goes undiagnosed. They just
Sure.
don't even know.
Yeah.
So one other thing that has fascinated me about dissociative identity disorder, is that what it is? Dissociative identity disorder is like, just I know there's Hollywood versions and whatever, but I've actually I do have a friend who was diagnosed with that. I knew her in high school, and she wasn't exhibiting any overt signs of maybe some anxiety and things. But when we reconnected I think it was in our 30s. What is it about the 30s when it feels safe enough to express or come out? But we reconnected, and then she shared what she was going through, and I had no idea. I mean, because it was, you just never know what people are going through around you.
Yeah. And those parts, but they were doing their job in high school. They were doing their job, which was to protect your friend. That's their job, is to protect them. And they are essentially, most of Margie's parts are children, because that's when they were formed, is when she was a child. And so the problem with it in the future is that you have to learn to live with that, and you have to learn to assure those parts that things are safe now, because they're still living in the past.
And don't you think we have to do that anyway to our inner child? Even, I mean, because we have all, from the second we're born, we entered trauma.
Right.
Being birthed is traumatic unless you have this totally conscious, and there are people that have bliss births, but I think it's pretty rare, that we compartmentalize parts of our lives, different experiences we have, because we can't deal with it at the time.
Right.
I look back on things that happened in my 20s, things that happened 2 years ago, and I'm like, a part of me cut off.
Right.
It was like too much.
Yeah.
And that peeling of the onion that we get to keep doing, it's a lifelong thing.
Right. It's a lifelong process. And the amazing thing about Margie is we see her in the story as she goes through the story and comes into adulthood and has her own children in her family. And she starts to recognize this and get some help for it. We see her begin to embrace her wholeness. In the beginning, she's so terrified of those parts because they hold such graphic, horrible secrets that come out in her nightmares and come out in some visions and things that she has during the day, glimpses of the past. And so she's terrified of them, but we see her begin slowly to embrace that. She embraces her wholeness and finds the ability to live with them, respecting her parts for the jobs that they have done, for what has happened in her past, and just believing in her own divine core of who she is, and respecting all of that. And so I think as a reader, and certainly for me as an author, in understanding her story and getting to know her before I could even write this book, it helps me to say, okay, I'm no different. I mean, I don't have DID.
Yeah.
But don't we all have to at some point embrace those parts of us that we don't like? We have to embrace the whole mess, the whole
The whole
package.
kit and caboodle. Well,
Absolutely.
and yeah, one of the things we discuss quite a bit on this podcast is shadow work, or some people refer to it as the dark goddess within us. It's the pieces of us that are unhealed.
Yes.
And until the body creates some kind of a containment of safety, it won't come out. So that's where I was kind of going with the 30s. You know, usually in the teens and 20s, we're just like, you know, to some degree partying or like going to college, or we're just kind of in this like survival mode of like, got to get a job, whatever, got to find a partner. So by the 30s, usually you have some degree of feeling settled.
Yes.
And that's when that safety is created. And that's when the body's like, are you kind of ready? Like you're ready now. And so I talked about this on the very, very first episode of this podcast, but my older sister, a year older than me, was ritually abused, and really horrific stuff. And she suffered, it didn't manifest. And it happened when she was a young girl, but it didn't manifest until, or she still didn't start having memories till she was in her late 20s. And what's interesting is, you know, her body held all of the memory of it.
Yeah.
And like organs, tissues, it wasn't just a mind thing. Like that was the old training that I got in psychology. It was like, everything happens in the brain, everything happens in the mind, but like your body is your mind.
Yes.
And so she would shake, she would, you know, just flashes of things. And of course we're helpless. You know, how do you support her here? And it was really interesting because that's not the same sister who committed suicide. The sister that committed suicide is 2 years younger than me. And her trauma, she had open heart surgery when she was 5. She had severe scoliosis, so she had a full spinal fusion when, I think at age 14, I was 16. And so most of her childhood was just fraught with, you know, her heart, her spine, and then she had a mental illness on top of that. So she was in her 30s and grappling with some old trauma and of being sick. But, you know, when you compound, and she's a high creative, so when you compound a mental illness with that, part of me thinks that she did disassociate to some degree. And then just when it started to come out is when her mental illness began to manifest. But she was also an addict. Anyway, I bring my sisters up only to add to what you're saying, in that, you know, I spent a lot of my 20s, to be honest, visiting my sisters in psychiatric facilities. And it was like, I would go into these places and it's one of the reasons I went a little bit more holistic, because I would feel the sickness. I would feel the labeling. I would feel the stigma and the shame that some of them carried, having to navigate what they were navigating, to the extent that they had to be hospitalized. And you had mentioned that you had that fear, right? They're going to lock me up, you know, that's a collective consciousness fear that people have because of the old ways of dealing with mental illness. So anyway, you know, I used to be like, shoo, well, I dodged a bullet. Like, I'm a middle sister of 2 sisters who are high creative bipolar. And one of them was ritually abused. I wasn't. And the other one had open heart surgery and back surgery. And I didn't. And I didn't get bipolar. And what I did is exactly, my coping mechanism is exactly how we started this discussion, which was yours, which was, I was the worker bee. So I worked and worked and worked to ward it off from a very young age. I became a high achiever. I kind of plunged into my religion as a means to achieve, in terms of learning everything I could, going on a mission, all the things. And as I've slowed down and scaled, had lots of kids, all the deal, business, everything, I just have so much compassion for my younger self who somehow believed that, that cloud was chasing her. So she had to keep running.
Right.
When I look at Margie's path, I mean, she had two sisters also. So I was kind of relating with that, but her sisters were sort of hands off. They weren't
so much older than her
like,
too.
were they not abused? Because it felt like they kind of moved on with their life and never really, they didn't have any, well, I don't know. The mom, she was legitimately not a safe mom.
No, completely not. We don't know fully about the sisters. We will not ever know if the sisters were abused, but certainly Margie took the brunt of it.
Yeah.
For sure.
The other thing that, and I know I'm skipping around a bit, but the other thing that I thought was so fascinating about this story is the doctor that she was sent to quote unquote fix her emotionally as a child, who, how many visits? 70 some before.
Yeah.
She didn't remember them because she was being drugged.
She was being drugged and manipulated mind-wise and the whole thing. Yeah.
So that doc, in what lends credibility to her story in terms of like, oh, she probably just, some people would be like, oh, well, that's just a fluke thing. Like that's probably a false memory or something. But like this doctor, there were more stories that came out about this doctor who's now deceased. And you said everything about him has been scrubbed from the internet.
Right.
So there was never justice with that. There was never real closure around his really unsavory practices, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Just she had nowhere safe to turn. I mean, she had no safety net anywhere. Both of her parents in very different ways abused her. Her sisters were gone. They were so much older than her. And so she was alone in the home for so long, and she just did not have a safe place, which is why the dissociation came into play for her. That was her only safe place.
And I think what we're kind of searching for in the purpose, in the grand scheme of life, as the way I look at it, is exactly what you're saying, that there are times on our path of spiritual development and learning where we are the only safe space we have.
Yes.
And to me, that's what sovereignty means. Sovereignty, because people get triggered when I say it sometimes. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm not saying that, I'm not devaluing the role of God to say this. God would have us be claiming the I am, which is, I know, I mean, the child can't do this. Children do not have the capacity. They don't know how to separate from their parents that way. They are one body, right?
Right.
But when we give our power away and we can't attach and we can't find the safety, and we're trying to find it in this group and that group and this training and that church and this partnership. And eventually we realize we're the common denominator, and claiming that we are our own, like I am my own. And I would even say, a lot of people say, I am God's, I am his, I am hers. And I love that. Also, I would add, like, when you are lined up with your soul, you are one with God. That's the at one-ment.
Right.
I know she's part of the power of her story is that she's still in it. She's come so far, and she's done all this healing and has been able to love her former self and really cradle that compassion. And again, this is what all of us are trying to do, is heal our inner child. But she just has this exacerbated childhood trauma that she's had to I can't even imagine. I literally, like, I was weeping through a lot of parts in the book because I just cannot even imagine having to deal with that.
Right.
But again, part of the power is that she's still in it, but she has a different perspective.
Yes.
Than she had when the trauma was first coming out. So even though the triggers may still be there, and I'll just, this isn't a super spoiler alert, but I'll just tell people, like, every night at 9:00 for how many years has this been happening for her?
Since she was very little. Yeah. As long as she can remember.
it's almost like there's this time clock inside of her that allows these things to come forward. Like the darkness comes in at 9 o'clock, and she's still, even having all these years around, the knowledge of this, it still comes through.
It still wants to seep forward. Yeah. And that's because that's when the abuse with her father started, was at 9 o'clock every night. And so that pattern wants to still come into her life. And so she has to do some hard work with those parts, and to tap into her divine core, and to say, okay, I'm going to tap into that. And this is who I am. And to sort of talk to those parts and put them in their place and take charge on her own of that. And the other thing that she does is she's able to anchor in hope. Yeah. And she, for her, that hope is Christ. And I know for all of your listeners and your audience, and for everyone, what does that mean for you? Who is that for you? For her, it was Christ. And so she was able to anchor in that, because you see, if you anchor in people, right, that's a dangerous thing, because that can change.
Right.
And for her, people betrayed her.
Right. So even her ecclesiastical people, she couldn't.
Oh, yeah.
They couldn't even really understand the gravity, or, because sometimes we conflate Christ or God with our spiritual leaders.
Right. No, it had to be deeper than that. It had to be deeper, more spiritual than that for her. So she was able to anchor in hope, which is amazing. And she still to this day stays anchored to the right things. And so and the other thing that she teaches us in her story is just this amazing persistence to endure and endure and endure, no matter what. I mean, you think of her as a little child begging in prayers, to please take this away. And it wasn't taken away. But later on, she still goes back to that anchor of hope, and is trying to see that her life is going to benefit the world in a different way because of where she's been. And so her persistence is just amazing. And we all have to persist through unanswered prayers, through wayward children, through health issues, through faith crises, there's so many things, right? Divorce and illness and all kinds of things. And so you have to tap into that core, right? That divine core that we all have, and to anchor in that, and to find the hope, which hope doesn't mean that we have the answers. Hope doesn't mean that it's taken away. Hope is sitting in the struggle and recognizing and believing that somehow, we can't see it, we don't know how, this will be lifted, or there will be a grand purpose for it.
Right. Well, I want to dive into hope and how it's fostered, and how you just find that little glimmer and ride the glimmer. I want to insert just a really short thing here too, is in my life, I think the one experience I've had where I was literally a hair's breadth from walking away and losing hope, was trying to get custody of and adopt our youngest child. So she's turning 7. She'll be 7 on 7/7/14 this year.
Wow.
She's our 7, and her name is Emma, which means the same thing 7 means, which is completion, wholeness. And anyway, there's a whole story with it. I had this vision similar. This was what you were talking about when you were on the plane and you saw this book. Well, I had a vision of 2 children, a boy and a girl. And I had 4 miscarriages in a row trying to bring them here. They're not showing up. Through miraculous means, and through announcing dreams and things, I got our son Eli. His birth mother came and lived with us. We'd had a private adoption during her pregnancy. She lived with us, and then we adopted him. And he's 8 now, almost. He's 8.5. And so when he came, I'm like, well, how are we going to get this girl? And anyway, it could be a whole other episode just talking about it. But my friend's daughter had a dream that that I was in, where she was handing this baby girl over and her friend was pregnant. Didn't know if it was a boy or girl yet. Ended up that she connected us. They lived in another state. So I would travel back and forth to try to get in this girl's graces. Her name's Madison, who was pregnant, found out that she was having a girl. And I knew it was my daughter. She didn't know that yet. But what happened, what I can only describe the next several months were just an absolute roller coaster of oblivion into not knowing, dangling carrot from the divine. Oh, this is not going to happen. Oh, this absolute wilderness, to the point where it got to the point where she's giving birth. She's texting me. I'm here in Utah. I fly to California. I'm there right when she comes home from the hospital. It was a horribly unsafe situation with a dangerous boyfriend and homelessness and all kinds of things. I get them set up. I'm holding my baby, knowing this is my baby, totally healthy, beautiful baby. And they're tossing her up in the air like she's a doll. And everyone in the apartment complex is coming over. And then I said, I really don't feel right about this baby's well-being. And they asked me to leave. So I left at midnight. I had been sleeping on the floor. And the next 3 weeks were me shaking my fist at God. Why would you bring me that far to not adopt this baby?
Yeah.
Then I get this call saying that she had been taken into foster care at 3 weeks old for abuse. And so I fought the state of California. And in that fight, why would they give her to a mother in Utah? It was like crazy, and already has 4 other kids. So there was that. And up until like finally getting custody after 6 court hearings, and in between every one of those court hearings, they're like, lawyers are like, you're not getting this baby. Why are you even here? Finally, the 6th court hearing, the judge, when I'm flying out with my husband every court hearing, finally gives us custody. Oh, but you can't leave the state of California. And my whole family's in Utah. So I get this 1-bedroom apartment, and then we go and plunge into another depth of not knowing. Am I going to get to keep her? Is the birth mom going to reunify? All my other 4 kids are at home, including a 2-year-old. Couldn't leave the state lines. I'm telling you way too much of a story, only to say that there was a song on K-Love called Hope in Front of Me. Well, there was 2 of them, but the Hope in Front of Me, and I can't remember the other one, but it was literally like, God was saying, this is going to be the most, you will never doubt me again after this. Like you will never shake your fit. And I sadly have since then, but that was the most miraculous, pronounced, everything from the dream to going into the wilderness of not knowing we're getting her, to seeing her in the vision, which she looks exactly like the long blonde hair, blue-eyed, everything that I saw, to why would God play this cruel joke on me? This is not happening. I'm just down in despair. I'm missing my kids at home. It's just in the murder capital of the US, a girl getting murdered down the, like every dark, I mean, the boyfriend that abused her had to be sent to another state so he didn't hurt me and everybody else. Like it was just, and I remember going, why would you, like, I have only ever wanted to be in the light. Why would you catapult me? And I was like, now I look back on that was totally an egoic way of looking at things. Like, why not me?
Sure. Right.
So going into the trench to literally putting my whole family on the altar to bring this, and myself, to bring this soul into our family. And what the ended up being super miraculous, like the birth mother and finally one court hearing was just like, they can have her, she can have her. Like, it was absolutely miraculous that we were able to adopt her when she was just under a year old. But I was stuck in that 1-bedroom apartment with her for 7 months. That's all the 7s, right? She's the 7th member of our family, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, I have my own lived experience with losing hope on multiple fronts, but that's the most pronounced one that I draw from. That the hand of God comes in, but it happens in just as much as you, like as little as you need to get through your lesson and the divine tutoring.
Right.
As little information as possible. Like you know.
A glimmer that you would miss so easily. Right.
Yeah. And there were so many times that I'm like, I'm out. And as soon as I'd be like, I'm out, something would come in. That's why I believe in divine intervention.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who transition out of religion or have a crisis or whatever, and they just lose complete hope of being sustained by something higher or having something that has a higher perspective, that they don't believe that intervention, because why are there children dying in Africa? And why
Sure.
did my
Right.
best friend die of cancer and
Right.
you lost your keys and you said a prayer and you got your keys? Right.
Yeah.
So I trust that I will be given what I need when I need it because of that experience.
Exactly.
Like from fighting the state of California to this abusive guy and that was it was so dark. And I finally I'm like, when am I actually going to fully get that I am given the breadcrumbs I need when I need them, and not anymore and not any less?
Yeah. It's the work is for us to do, but we've got to position our hearts to recognize those. And it's hard when you're in the darkness, right? And you keep talking about, being down in the gutters, right? At this point in your life where it's dark and it's just awful. And, that's where I think we can all look back at our lives and say, that's where some of our greatest gifts, mostly spiritual gifts, are received, is from the face plant, right? We are face down in the mud, rolling around. And I think it's important to give ourselves permission to feel that for some period of time. But at some point, we received the strength and we were able to reach deep inside of our soul and to stand up in that mud puddle and wipe our face off. Guess what? You have a new gift because of where you've been and what you've just been through. You have new perspective and you have new empathy to now go out into the world and lift someone else up. And you wouldn't have had that before, not quite in the same way. And so, we don't get our gifts from the porch swing sipping lemonade. That's a beautiful day. And those are important days. We get our most incredible gifts to make a difference in the face plant, down in the dark, in the trenches. That's where they come from.
I love
and
that.
That's why they're so powerful when we receive them, is because of where we've been and how far we've come out of that.
Right. So I'm curious what Margie does to come back to center at 9:00 at night. And then I'm really curious too, what you found about hope, how you said we've got to position our hearts. I'd love you to kind of walk through what that is for you and what you've learned about that.
Right.
For instilling hope.
Right. Margie, she would speak better to it than I would, but essentially she goes back to that anchor, that anchor of Christ, and trying to calm herself and stay present.
Does she pray? Does she visualize Christ with her? Christ is my anchor too.
Yeah.
I have others that come in at different times, including more feminine deity figures in my mind's eye. But what does she do? How does she bring him in? How does she anchor with that? Sorry to interrupt you, but I feel like we say this a lot in Sunday school and church, and people talk about it, but nobody really teaches you how to, because I hear the word anchor and it's such a powerful word. It just lands you and grounds you.
Right.
So
she, I think there's a scene in the book where she kneels by her bed and she envisions not that she's speaking up to the heavens, but that he is next to her. He is kneeling right next to her, and she invites her parts to be there as well. That we're all praying to this, divine anchor that will keep us safe tonight, and that everything is going to be okay. And here is light. Don't go to the dark. Here is light right here, kneeling by the bed. This is light. And so she does a lot of that frame of reference, and it's helpful for her. She prays all day long, and she's just always trying to anchor towards light. And for her, that light is Christ, and it is finding her true core. and having that front and center.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think there's the whitewashed version of Christ where he's like, two-dimensional. He's like, holding a child on his lap or something. And those are beautiful renditions, right? But when it comes to your like own embodied trauma and pain, calling in an anchor in his, his relation to your pain, his own embodied humanness, right? And for some people, including myself, that feels more comforting than a removed, exalted, not that he's not, I'm just saying, like, for me to really attach and feel that anchor and really feel like he can relate, I had to make him human, sitting with me,
right,
talking to me.
Yeah, exactly.
So for you to position your heart in that phrasing, I really like how you put that. What do you do? Do you have a practice that helps you foster more hope? I mean, I everything in life is an act of trust, you guys. Like, we're hoping for everything. Like, when is this pandemic? When are we going to fully be over this pandemic? And I hope this, I hope that, right?
I know. We use that word
Everything is
loosely.
It's just a guesswork.
Yeah. For me, it's taking time every day to meditate and to pray. And I do that maybe differently than some in your audience would do it. I've tried to do the sitting in one place, and I do that occasionally. But what really, really helps me center myself, pull in the positivity, out with the negativity, and that is to be out walking outside. Fortunately, I live in Arizona, so the weather most of the year is, really good for that. And so it's out walking or it's hiking. And so my arms and my legs are moving, but there's no music in my ears. And it is just a meditation. And I do it by myself. I don't do it with, a bunch of people. And so that is really my time to center myself every single morning.
I completely honor that as a spiritual practice because I do the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't do it every morning. And then sometimes I listen to a podcast or music, but when I don't have anything in my ears and I'm just taking in all the sensory beauty, it's so powerful. And I've heard of different things, like you could do like a gratitude walk where you just notice everything you're grateful for and have that conversation with deity. For me though, like you said, it's just the movement. It's just being grateful that I have a body that can move.
Yeah.
And it's empowering.
Right. Right.
So
yeah, it is. It's gratitude for limbs that can carry me up this mountain, and gratitude for the beauty that I see all around me. It's a really it's one of my most spiritual times in the entire week, really. I mean, and I do it at most mornings, not all mornings, but and it's just a time to just really feel close spiritually, and to honor where I've come from and how far I've come, and all those parts of me that are messy, and who I am today, and that I want to be even better. I want to share light in the world. And how can I do that? It's just a really introspective, gratitude-filled moment that's holy to me. It is my holy space. And it's, sweating on the side of a rocky mountain, scrambling to the top, trying to avoid rattlesnakes. But it's holy. It's a holy space for me, and it works.
I love that. I would agree. And I know a lot of people like nature is their church because that's where they feel the most. It's like, you can go to church and sing and be under the fluorescent lights and be all stiff in your nice, Sunday best. And there's some beauty around that. But when you get out and enjoy the elements and connect to Mother Earth, and there's a whole other level of that connection to your body that I feel like gets bypassed when you're trying to praise in other ways.
And it's having a real conversation, with whatever that higher power is that you profess to. It's a real conversation. I'm laughing and I'm crying and I'm talking about what I'm grateful for, and I'm talking about what I love in my life and what I'm worried about in my life. And it's just a real, raw conversation.
Mm.
And it's just beautiful, really.
Yeah. And that's so I loved what you shared with me earlier about Margie's definition of wholeness, because
Mm-hmm.
it just reminded me just then of when you said the messy thing. So how does she define wholeness?
So her wholeness is embracing those parts. They are all part of her. And initially, she was so frightened of them because they held really horrible, vivid memories that would come forward, and she would, see things, flashes of events from the past, and that those are parts coming, seeping forward with some of those. And eventually she got to the point where her wholeness is those parts are all, they belong to her, and she embraces them and she loves them for the protection that they gave her.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a respect for all of that.
Yeah.
As opposed to putting your arm up and saying, oh, don't come near me. You're a scary person. She's empathetic for their feelings. They are feeling, whatever part of the abuse they've taken. And so it's just embracing all of it. That is wholeness for her. And having the ability to stand out front as Margie, the core, and to put the others either standing next to her or behind her. So she's able to mentally form that picture every day when she gets up and gets out of bed. Wow. She forms that picture. It's an exercise that she goes through every day. And in essence, we all do that, right? We don't have DID.
Like who's going to lead out today?
Yeah.
Am I going to be my compassionate self, or am I going to be my bitchy self?
Right.
We don't. And I love that. I see wholeness now. I used to see it as this
kind of perfect-ish.
Yeah. Like more like you transcended or you ascended and you became whole you. But really the power of our experience here on earth is the rootedness in our shadows. It's owning the mess.
Mm-hmm.
It's celebrating it sometimes. As long as we're not hurting someone else, we're still learning and we're going to inadvertently hurt people. But if we're not intentionally out to injure or hurt people, like Margie's parents, they were intentionally hurting. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was horrific. But if most parents don't intentionally hurt their children, they just do it by osmosis. Like, well, I guess I'm not perfect, but that freedom to be messy. I did a whole episode on just like, say yes to the mess.
Yeah.
We talked like everything in creation is messy.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. Childbirth is messy, like starting project. So wholeness is like enjoying the journey of that messy, knowing that there's this hope.
Right.
It's going to yield a creation that you can't even fathom will be for your highest good and for everyone else's highest good.
Yeah. And I think when we get to a point, like, you and I, and probably most of your audience is, where we're sort of embracing this philosophy, I think as we move forward in our life, we can say, when we feel a hard time coming on, we can say, okay, I'm gaining a new gift. Yeah, I can feel it coming, right?
Yeah.
And to just sort of allow yourself to go through that process and not kick against it as hard as you did when you were your younger self, who didn't have the wisdom that you do today.
Like we can't judge ourselves with the light level we have now and go back in the past.
No.
To judge that because you didn't know. You
didn't know.
You did the best you
don't
could.
Know what you don't know. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Heidi, this has been really beautiful. Is there anything that you would add that we haven't covered about hope, or maybe just holding on when you feel like you've lost it?
Yeah. Just that it's always there. And just if you can keep in mind sort of the visual, if you can visualize, I kind of talk a little bit about it in that first book, Finding Hope in the Journey. But if you can visualize yourself going up the mountain and you're on a really steep trail. What does that look like? Are your blinders on? Are you looking at your feet as you plod up that rocky trail? Instead, metaphorically, take a look around you, lift your head up, take the blinders off and look around you. That's part of making yourself more aware and recognizing that maybe there is some hope out there. It does two things. You recognize little glimmers of hope that can be a butterfly, right? It can be, there's so many beautiful things that can happen that let you know that you're not alone. But also when you lift your head up in the midst of a struggle like that, you recognize that there are others that are struggling too. It's not, oh, it's just me,
Yeah.
You can see
That's
others
true.
and there's power in that, to know that you really, truly are not alone and that we all struggle. But on the converse, there is always hope, always, always. It's out there. It's up to us to position our hearts to find it.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I think for me, when I've had low points in my life, it's just the most pervasive feeling is how alone I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like no one understands or no one's with me on this and so even in those, as I look back now, everything is like hindsight is 2020, right? But as I look back, even on that adoption foster care experience I shared with you, like I can see how a person came in or a caseworker said this, or
Right.
how God used different people to give me that hope. But I
Mm-hmm.
was just so feeling sorry for myself. I wanted the big grand, like, hello,
Mm-hmm.
show me right now. And it feels like slowing down and being with it and being patient is part of fostering hope.
Yes.
Is just taking a breath and noticing what is working, what
Mm-hmm.
is there for you, what supports you do have, and then showing that gratitude, because gratitude magnifies everything. And that's one thing
Yes.
that I did learn. It's like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh, I'm here in this one bedroom apartment and my 2-year-old and my kids in junior high and high school, and I'm here and like and it still might not work out, and what am I missing? And it's like, yeah, there's stuff you're missing,
Yeah.
literally missing right in
Yeah.
front of you.
Right.
And it was like, whoa, okay. And then I would regroup and then I would feel sorry for myself.
Yeah, it's a hard cycle to get out of. But you're right. Gratitude is such a spiritual teacher, isn't it? It just rewires our thoughts and the peace that we feel inside. It's amazing. It's been an amazing teacher for me.
Yeah. And the scriptures even share that it's like for me, it's like throwing gasoline on goodness, on the fire of goodness.
Right.
The gasoline being the gratitude, just and
Yeah.
that it does say that more will be added into you hundredfold, and all these things in the scriptures testify of that, and not just in the biblical texts and canonized scriptures we have, but I don't know a spiritual teacher or a thought leader that's not teaching about the power of gratitude, just because
Yes.
it is an anchor.
Yeah.
It's an anchor.
100%. And it's for some really hard times in my own life, my gratitude prayers have been, I'm grateful that I had a pillow under my head last night. I'm grateful that my shower was warm this morning. Sometimes I have to go back to the really simple basics because I truly at that time in my life don't feel gratitude for anything. I'm just in the pit. So when I'm in the pit, there are still things I can be grateful for. And if I voice those, something transformational happens to me. If I do that every
Say
single
it out loud.
day. Yep. Yep.
I would say the same is probably, as I'm listening to you, like doing that in your relationships, is pouring the gasoline, like voicing it, giving
Right.
praise, gratitude.
Right.
And like I said, as I've been swinging in the pendulum of my own faith journey, transition, expansion, truth, whatever I'm doing right now, it feels like I can't let go of this concept that I'm being held, sustained, supported. Like I said, divine intervention. There's no question in my mind. I'm not going to put that on everyone else to believe. But in my body and in my lived experience, divine intervention is a real thing. And maybe when my mission in life is complete, that hand will withdraw itself and I'll be taken back where I need to be. But it feels so alive in me to just trust that I'm on an errand, that my soul is on an errand to learn this beautiful concept of just allowing things to unfold, and to give gratitude for what I do have, not making the long laundry list of the things that I don't have.
Right. Here on a mortal experience to feel. I really believe that we're here on a mortal experience to feel.
To feel what we need to feel. Well, this has been delightful, Heidi. How can people, so you're HeidiTucker.com.
Yes.
And your books are on Amazon?
My books are on Amazon, or you can get them directly from my website. I've got a YouTube channel, Heidi Tucker. I'm all over Facebook and Instagram, LinkedIn. So Heidi Tucker is the place to go. And if you want to contact me, I'm available at any one of those links.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. This was super inspirational.
Thank you. Appreciate it so much.